A candid conversation.
This has been ongoing, and people who have been in the struggle were exhausted, we're tired.
About systemic racism and what it means.
I think America woke up when we watched, the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd.
There are people who are saying, well, I'm not racist. That spirit is still alive.
I assembled a panel of community leaders to share their views about how racism is embedded in our country and community, and how to treat it and heal from it.
Trauma not treated is transferred.
The panel included Ellen Katz, CEO of the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, Dr. Kyra Shahid, Director of the Center for Diversity and Inclusion at Xavier University, Darryl Peal, Chief Diversity Officer at Northern Kentucky University, Christopher Miller, Senior Director of Education and Community Engagement at the Underground Railroad Freedom Center, and Patricia Pope, CEO and Chief Creative Officer at Pope Consulting.
How important is it to, one, admit that there is systemic racism? And then secondly, how do you recognize it? How is it defined?
All too often, we forget that many institutions and organizations were never designed to have people of color there. They never anticipated people of color participating in the programs, attending the universities, and then so many of the practices and policies that we have in place really don't allow us to have full citizenship in the organization, full citizenship on the campus, or full participation in the institution. And so that's when you recognize that when those barriers become part of the fabric of the institution, you have systemic racism.
I think it is important to acknowledge it. One of the things I always say is the inherent challenge in diversity is that it's very difficult to understand someone else's reality that's not your own, because it's not yours. That 8 minutes and 46 seconds caused a real shift to occur in this country in a way that I haven't seen in the 44 years I've been doing this work.
It's an understanding that this has been so woven into the fabric and culture of our country, race has been, but we choose not to have the conversation because it's uncomfortable. But it has always been there.
So how do we start that conversation? And Dr. Shahid, you've talked about the need for healing because we have these repeated episodes where basically the scab keeps getting ripped off of racism here in our country.
I think healing has to begin for everybody exactly where you are. We have so many students who are coming forward and they want to know, rightfully so, right? Like, what can I do to get involved? How can I make a difference? I'm not Black. I don't have a Black experience. And I'm going, what does that have to do with racial trauma? Because Black folks don't own racism. And guess what? We can't fix it. So you start with your community. You start with your family. You start with your corporation. You start with your neighborhood.
We're trying to begin the dialogue around racial equity and how to get there with truth. And that comes from history, just learning our history in a way that is not whitewashed, that just speaks the truth of what has happened in our nation. And we have found that people who have engaged in these conversations just can see the dynamics of structural racism in very different ways.
Lisa Smith, WCPO 9 News.